in conversation with another New York Times bestselling author and columnist, Melissa Clark. The two will be discussing Dorie's latest bestseller, Baking with Dorie. This program is generously sponsored by the Walner Group, Keller Williams. To get your copy, please check your local JCC websites for their independent booksellers. The book is also available from the official bookseller of the MJCCA, Acapella Books. We know you're going to have lots of questions for our guests. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and Melissa will try to get to as many of them as possible. And now a little about our honored guests. Our moderator is Melissa Clark, the winner of multiple James Beard Awards and the author of many New York Times bestsellers, including Dinner in French and Dinner in an Instant. She writes the wildly popular New York Times column, A Good Appetite. Our featured author, Dorie Greenspan, was inducted into the James Beard Foundation's Who's Who of Food and Beverage in America and is the 2017 James Beard Award winner for Best Baking and Dessert book. She lives in New York City, Westbrook, Connecticut, and Paris. Please welcome both of our guests to our virtual stage.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Dorie.
Hi, Melissa. It's so good to see you.
It's always a delight. Welcome to everyone out there. Welcome to you, Dorie. Dorie and I were talking just before we turned our cameras on about how this is kind of a crazy way for us to get to spend time together, but we don't get to see each other enough. So we're going to have a conversation, and we are longtime friends, and we're excited to have you all join in. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A. I won't be seeing the chat, so I'm only going to keep one window open. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We really want to hear from you. But Dorie and I are going to chat for a little while, and then we're going to take as many of your questions as we can. And we're going to be chatting about her new wonderful book, which I'm sure all of you, if you don't have, I'm sure you will by the end of the night, Baking with Dorie. And the first question I want to ask, because I really need to know, is, Dorie, you are amazing. You've written so many books. How do you keep coming up with new material? Tell me.
So, Melissa, I could flip that question and ask you, because you have so many books and a new one coming out in March. Yes,
that's right. But we're here to talk about you. I have a new book coming out, so we got to keep it on you.
Let's just talk about, I'll just mention Dinner
in one.
One pot, one sheet pan, one.
Yep, one vessel to get the job done, because that's, pretty much what all of us need right now. But then after dinner, after we do our one pot dinner, we need to make something sweet for dessert, and that is where you are our godmother. You are the one we turn to.
You need dessert. Everyone needs dessert. I wrote this book half in the before time and half during the pandemic. And I thought that we needed dessert in the before times. And I really knew that we needed it. Yeah. Dessert it's always a treat. I mean, you're a baker. So you know that those of us who bake love to bake, and we love to share. But I don't know about you. Have you ever figured out a way to make dessert a major food group?
I was just thinking, okay, so as I was making pies for Thanksgiving, I was just thinking about pies in American culinary history, right? And they occupied so much of a larger space than we give them today. Pies were actually the meal, and not just savory pies, but sweet pies too, because sweet pies like apple pie and pumpkin pie were not as sweet as they are today, but they were still sweet. Like, you'd still consider them a dessert. And you would actually eat a slice of pie, and that would be your dinner. And I just was thinking, like, why can't we just do that? Why can't we just, like, Dorie, can we do that? Can that be your next book?
Well, let's start a movement.
Pie for dinner.
Pie for dinner. I think, though, the only really, now that I don't think we're going to manage pie for dinner.
Probably not.
We can try, though, but
maybe like pie and a salad. Or salad first and then pie.
And now we're back to dessert.
And now we're back to dessert. All right, we're back to where we started. But yeah, so you were saying that more people, you're trying to get desserts to be a major food group, but more people were baking during the pandemic.
Yes, yes, and looking forward to dessert as what it is, a treat.
Yeah.
Dessert is really the only reason to make dessert is pleasure. And during the I think of it as the confinement.
Yeah.
It was really, I brought this up because you asked about inspiration. It was so interesting for me to see the difference in how I was working, that when I started this book, I thought, well, I had two thoughts about this book. I thought it was going to be all savory.
Mhm. Oh, okay.
Right. It started as a savory book. And I thought, okay, savory baking. I've never done that before. I was very excited about it. And the more I worked, kind of the sweeter the book got. And so, the reading title is Sweet, Salty, and Simple. But sweet comes first because there are more dessert recipes. But I thought I'll be traveling around. I'll be talking to other bakers. I'll be inspired by markets and places I've never visited before. And I was, until I couldn't be. And then this became the Big Wise Stop and Shop cookbook. This was the supermarket cookbook. And the inspiration had to come from a very small area. It had to come from what I was seeing in the market, what I could buy, and what I wanted to be able to make and share with my little family. And it gave me a whole new way of looking at desserts and at baking. And once again, I use the word pleasure, the pleasure of baking.
Now, when you say that, so the inspiration had to come from in here, I mean, did you find yourself craving different things during lockdown or confinement, than you normally do, or than you did in the, prior to?
I always want dessert. I wanted it more. So we were fortunate in that Joshua, son, Linling, daughter-in-law, were with us, and she was pregnant. So they stayed with us until the baby was born, for almost 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I had the joy of being able to feed a family during this time and to make dessert. And I just found that I wanted dessert. I wanted to make sure that there was always something sweet in the house, that there would be cookies to nibble on, that there would be something to share at the end of the day. And it kind of brought me full circle. I came to desserts because that's what I wanted. And it became my work.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back to realizing how much I love doing this.
Yeah, you couldn't get away from it. There was no the savory only went so far.
And I was back to dessert.
Right. So you talk about going to the supermarket because obviously, you weren't traveling around. Did you find yourself looking at recipe developing differently, being kind of confined to one shop or, without, I don't know, or did you find that you were able to order whatever you needed? Was it different in that way?
It was. So I think as I've worked, so this is my 14th cookbook and my 30th year since publication. So my first book came out in 91. And I think as I look back and I see what I've written and how I've changed, everything I do seems to be getting simpler and simpler and simpler. So having simple in the reading title, I kind of wanted it to be like simple, and buying my ingredients from the supermarket, using everyday ingredients, which I used most of the time, but I was more aware of it now because this is what I had.
Right.
Really helped me to make simpler recipes to really, you probably found this as well, to try and get all of the flavor you could out of basic ingredients, get the most interesting textures.
Mhm.
But I mean, you were doing a recipe a day during, you were our guardian angel during pandemic.
Yeah, well, I did find that I was leaning into, I mean, it was basically like a diary, I was just writing down what I was cooking. But yeah, I was leaning into the simplest things because I think all of our anxiety levels were so high. So on the one hand, we needed to be fed so well, like our bodies were just craving nourishment. And also company, food and cooking is company. But on the other side of it, there was I couldn't take any extra, like there was just no time for any extra steps. It had to be as streamlined as possible. It was this little dance of how well can I eat for as few ingredients and as little, wash up and effort as possible, but yet still having this. So, and I feel like in this book, you've exactly what I'm finding. It's like you're the master of that. Like, let's talk about the way that you re-engineered some of your older recipes to kind of hit those sweet spots. We could talk about world peace cookies or any other recipes that you rejiggered in a way.
Well, so world peace cookies was a very special situation. And so the world peace cookie, for those of you out there who don't know it, was a recipe developed by Pierre Hermé, a French pastry chef, and he made it. I can't remember the year, maybe 98 or I'm not sure, for a restaurant in Paris called Corova. And he gave me the recipe, and it was in Paris Sweets, in a book that came out in 2002, and it was called Corova Cookies. And it's a chocolate sablé, a French shortbread, but Pierre put brown sugar in it, which is not usual in a French shortbread. And so he said he was thinking of the American chocolate chip cookie. So it has a little bit of chew that you don't normally expect. And it has lots of chopped chocolate, and it had salt. And way back then, having salt that you could taste, you bit the cookie and you got the chocolate, salt. It was such a surprise. It was, now we salt with abandon and we sprinkle salt on top, but that was revolutionary. So everybody loved the cookie, and that was it. And then I was finishing up baking from my home to yours, and my neighbor said, that cookie with the funny name, this is a long way to get around to a new cookie, but for people who don't know it, he said, we call it the world peace cookie, because if everyone in the world had this cookie, peace forever. And so I published the recipe again, because with a name like world peace cookie, right? Had to.
Can't go wrong.
Can't go wrong. So that's how many years ago? It's 15 years ago. And over that time, I've seen people put peanut butter in it and put mint in it and put Heath bar chips and things. And I left it the way it was because it was perfect. And then, now I'm getting to the new version. Then Charlotte Druckmann, you know Charlotte.
Yeah, of course.
So Charlotte wrote a book called Women on Food, and she asked me if I would make a world peace cookie for her book. And I said, no. Perfect, not going to change the cookie. And then I kept thinking, women, world peace cookie, are there ingredients that match the characteristics that I admire in women? And so I didn't change the cookie. I added to it. I added cocoa nibs for strength, rye flour for earthiness, chili powder like piment d'Espelette for that kind of little spark of unpredictability, and freeze-dried raspberries for, how they have a pop, they're like verbal, sassy, and that became the world peace cookie version 2.0. And I wouldn't, it was intellectually interesting to try and take those ingredients and think about them in terms of human characteristics, but I wouldn't have done it if it weren't also delicious. It's a really good cook. Yeah, it's a good cookie.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Another thing that you do in this book, and you know, that I guess, or maybe you're leaning into more in this book, is I love your technique about making the cookies in muffin tins.
Oh,
And the is it called butterscotch?
it has an endless name. I have to
The
look
caramel, right? Those caramel, fabulous. I bake those with my daughter.
I gave it such a long name that now I can't remember it unless I look for it. Wait, they are called caramel crunch chocolate chunklet cookies.
We'll just
So
call them caramel crunch for short. How about that?
chunklets for short.
Chocolates. Oh, great. There we go. Caramel chocolates.
So I started when Joshua, son, I used to call him the kid, but those days are gone. When Joshua and I had a cookie business, we baked our cookies in rings so that they were all the same size. And I loved the way they looked. And using a muffin tin, it's not the same, but it gives you that uniform size. And with these cookies, so they're like I say they're like a chocolate chip cookie that took a visit to France. So they also have that kind of chew and chunks of chocolate. And the caramel that's in the name is there not because you add caramel, but because they're baked in the muffin tin, the sides and the bottom really brown. So the butter gets nutty and the sugar gets caramelly, and it changes. Putting a cookie in a tin like that not only changes the shape, but changes the way it bakes. And so it's softer in the center than it is on the sides. And I think they're so pretty.
Oh yeah. I mean, first of all, they're fabulous. And I think anybody who hasn't baked those, it should be on your absolute, go-to list. To me, I was talking to my daughter when we were eating them, and I was like, do you taste the caramel? And she was like, to me, they're more brown butter, but it's like, just like, sort of just that crossover and I find that there are people in the world when it comes to cookies who really like them like that, which is how I like them, browned all around and, just with that nutty flavor. And then there are the people who like them totally not brown. Do you know those people? Do you know who I'm talking about? People who just want the cookies that are, I would consider them underbaked, but yet they have their fans. What do you say to that, Dorie?
So not to insult anyone, because I want everyone to have the cookie that they love.
Yes, of course.
I am not a fan of the big cookies that never get baked in the center.
Yes.
I don't like those. I don't. So I was talking to Jesse, oh, I know I'm not going to get his name right. SZEW. Oh, I'll look it up and I'll get it for you, because he just wrote a cookie book.
Right.
And Jesse and I were talking about cookies, and we thought maybe we could have like a dating app where we could pair people by their cookie preferences.
I think it's better to actually do the opposites attract thing, because here's the thing. When I'm baking, I know that my oven is sort of uneven. And even when I turn my pans, there's hot spots. And I always get some of the cookies. In fact, I just made spritz cookies today, and I had this happen. It's like some of them, especially ones around the edges, were dark brown the way I like them. And the ones in the middle were pale. And so, you know what? It's like, that's perfect for the two different kinds of people. Or like, Jack Spratt, who eats no fat, his wife. And that way everybody gets, you can just bake one pan of cookies and everybody gets what they want.
Well, it's so one pan. It's so you.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. I could see you like time it perfectly so that all of the ones in the pan came out the same way.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I have Joshua and I talk about cookies a lot. And we both like crisper cookies, right? Well, but ginger snap. It's really, I'm on a cookie by cookie basis.
I think that's right. And I think that like when you see a good cookie, we know a good cookie, which is generally the cookie that's in front of us. at the moment. Let's talk about the savory. I know cookies, you wrote an entire book on cookies also.
Yes.
So cookies, and you had a cookie company. So cookies are, I think, is it fair to say cookies are kind of up there in your dessert hierarchy?
Yeah.
But where does savory baking fit in for you, and what made you start there for this book?
So I don't know that I have an origin story for my other books, but this book started on a day in August. I was in Santa Barbara at a wedding. I had a scone. It was beautiful. I put it on Instagram because one does put beautiful scones on Instagram. And the author, Anne Ma, wrote to me and said, you should write a savory baking book. After seeing that, she DM'd me, and I thought, when you have a good idea, is it physical? Can you like get goosebumps and tingly? And yeah.
Yep,
So
tingly scalp.
Okay, so I get it here. So this is a tingle idea. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And the fact is, I love savory baking. But as I said, the more I worked on it, the more I said, well, okay, I'll just do one little sweet, and the balance tipped. But I think it's so interesting to take techniques that we know or combinations that we know to be sweet and to move them over a little bit, to kind of tilt them savory. And so, I mean, there are, quiche is a savory, but like this was so much fun. I made a clam chowder pie. I was eating clam chowder and looking at it and thinking, a little thickener, it could be pie. And then took the oysterettes, the little crackers that you put, and made that top crust. And you can do that with savory. The techniques are the same, right? But it's just, you just use a different kind of amusing part of your brain to think about that. Like when I was doing gougere, the French cheese puffs, I thought, this is not quite the same as it, but I thought, oh, I always scoop them. I always make them round. What if they were sticks? I had never done, in all the baking that I had done, I had never made, I'd made eclair, long cream puff dough, but I had never thought to make the savory that way. And so it's just, don't you find that the more you work, the more ideas you have?
Yeah. And also I find myself questioning things that I've always taken for granted, just like that. Like the gougere is such a perfect example. When you were talking about it, I'm like, yes, because it's like every gougere, they're round. That's what they are. They are round. But why? And why should they be that way? And that to me is the most fun thing, is busting through those truths, those things that we think are true, and then saying, you know what, hey, guess what? And so what did you find? So you made them. So, talk us through how you changed that recipe and what you found by changing the shape. How did you change, the creation?
What you change, so it's the same recipe. Well, I did play. So I love gougere, and I've been making them for years, and I have them in the freezer because you can make the dough, scoop it, or I don't pipe any longer. I use a cookie scoop. Scoop them, freeze them, and then pop them in the oven when you need them. No, direct freezer to oven to here, have some gougere with a glass of wine. And so I keep playing with the cheese that goes into them, and whether herbs or nuts. And so in Baking with Dorie, it's Gouda and cumin. And so that seemed like a kind of stretch because it made something that's actually really good with beer. It's got that kind of, it took something.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right?
See that. Yeah.
And made it popcorny and beer.
Yep.
And that was really fun. And then when I piped them longer, and I piped them in kind of little chubby fingers, and I also at one time piped them like 12 inches long, like breadsticks. So when you change the shape, you change the sensation of eating them, because you get a different feeling of the the crispy crust around it. And when I did that and loved them, I thought, well, if I did this with this, cream puff dough is never really sweet, but if I do it with the non-cheese dough,
Like an egg, like a, pâte à choux, an éclair dough, right?
right. So it's such a fabulous dough because, as you know, it can be savory, it can be sweet, it can be éclair, it can be profiterole. So I made these long, non-savory sticks. And they were like the Japanese snacks, the pocky sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they could get dipped in white chocolate and get sprinkles on the end. And that was an aha moment for me. It's not, it was pretty earth shaking for me. I was going to say it's not earth shaking, but I was so, I'm here working alone. And I sometimes talk, and a lot of times I talk to myself. And when something is good, I go, oh, yes, you might get like, yes, say it out loud. And so piping the dough long and skinny and changing the way we think about it and feel about it and the way we eat it was exciting.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, especially, because then you've taken a classic dessert, right? You've taken, like, say, an éclair. Let's just start there because, and you've made it skinnier and longer, right?
Right.
And then you've had this thing, and then all of a sudden you're connecting it to yet another dessert. Like, you are bridging this gap between these two cultures and bringing them together. You have the French pâte à choux, you have the Japanese pocky sticks, and you're like creating this whole new thing out of the two. And that is the fun. That is so much the fun part of recipe developing, is like when you have that, like, oh, okay, like you said, that aha moment.
It's really, I think I'm so lucky that I get to do this.
Oh,
Not everything works. And
yes, that's true.
right, not everything works,
Yeah.
but it's you're working, you think, what if I added nuts? What if I didn't add nuts? What if I changed the shape? What if, and so there's a loaf cake in the book that's miso maple loaf.
Mhm. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Well, but that came from a salmon. I mean, it doesn't sound appealing, I don't think, but I'm going to say it. It came from a salmon recipe. I was making a miso maple salmon and looked at the ingredients and tasted them and thought that could be a cake. So it's those kinds of stretches, those kinds of little jumps to something else that are really fun. And again, I mean, if it doesn't taste good, then the jump is just fun, but it's nothing.
Yeah. So what I was going to ask you about is, so this book is, divided up into sweet and savory, and then you have sweet and savory all rolled up into one. And was that something that you thought, like, once you started adding sweet things, did you think, oh, well, here, let me combine them? Or was it just case by case?
Case by case. I find it interesting when there's an edge to a sweet, when it's not, I mean, a single flat flavor isn't very interesting. And often what makes something interesting, I think, is that bit of edge. So something like maple syrup, which we think of as a sweetener, has that a slight little note of bitterness, the way caramel does, or
Molasses.
Molasses too. Even honey. I find even honey can have, it teeters a little bit. And so often, and herbs and spices can also give you that, just nudging something over a little bit. And I think it makes it interesting. And what I love, and I do this because I want people to enjoy it the way I do, but it starts out selfishly that I do it for myself. I want to build a surprise into a recipe. I want you to grab a cookie and think, oh, I know what this is, and eat it while you're, and then be stopped because there's something here I didn't expect.
And okay, so about taking that, that theme, let's talk about the way that you re-engineered chocolate chip cookies, right? So chocolate chip cookies, you think those are so classic, you can't touch a chocolate chip cookie. But in fact, you have done a lot with a chocolate chip cookie to give people an experience that they wouldn't necessarily expect. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so I have, actually, there's a story that just went up on Food 52 on the site that's a chronology of my chocolate chip cookies. And I'll often make something and think, this is so great. And Michael, husband, will say, you've made this before. Because I never remember, I don't remember. And like you, I've done a lot of recipes. So I looked at these chocolate chip cookies and I realized that, I played with spices a lot. I played with the ratio of white to brown sugar. I played with shape. So for instance, in the new book, there's a chocolate chip cookie, and I don't use chips, actually, I use chopped chocolate. That's called One Big Break Apart Chipper. And I've taken the dough and rolled it out thin, all higgledy-piggledy. It doesn't have to be nothing perfect, and baked it. And then you can just break pieces of it off. And once again, it's that change of shape that changes the texture, that changes the way you taste it and feel about it.
Yeah.
And it's fun and it's beautiful and it's delicious.
And easy too, because you don't have to make each cookie. You can see, and that's up my alley. You just put the whole thing on, and then then it's fun to.
Right up your alley.
Totally up my alley. I know. I saw that one, and I was like, that is definitely something I'm going to try. And also, another thing is that because the center is going to be softer than the edges, everybody can find the piece of the cookie that they want.
Like your spritz cookies, yes.
Exactly. So it's perfect. And then of course there's also adding different things to, what we think of, like you were talking about adding rye flour to your world peace cookies. There's all these different, you can talk about the mocha nuts cookies.
Oh, I love the mocha nuts cookie. So Mocha Nuts is a small, really small restaurant in Paris, and it's just breakfast and lunch. And Mocha makes fabulous cookies. And in fact, when I didn't know about the shop, and I was in Paris, I was on the other side of the street, and her door was open, and I saw a stack of cookies. And Michael kept walking, and I didn't even.
You were like,
I just drawn to the shop, and her cookies, they're chunky. She bakes them when you say you want cookies, she puts them in the oven and bakes them, and it's really hard to. I don't know if people can see, but they're like pucks, and when she finishes them, she gives them a little tap with a spatula. And when I first saw them, I thought it was almost her fingerprint. And this cookie has rye flour, and it has poppy seeds, and it has cranberries, and it has chunks of chocolate, and it's got salt. And it's a chocolate chip cookie, but it's so much more. And I think that, we have the Toll House cookie to thank for all of this, but the possibilities are endless for what we can do with that base.
So did you find yourself at the end of the book having recipes that you're like, I need to fit in another one, just one more?
So I never know what I have. You would think I would be more organized than this, but I don't really know what I have until just about the end. So when my editor says, don't forget the book is due, in 3 weeks, that's when I start making lists. And that's how I ended up with special sections in this book that I hadn't planned. So I take, when that email comes, I take little cards and I write the names of every recipe on them, and I kind of deal them out. Oh, this can go in breakfast. And this is actually the first time I've had a breakfast chapter for 15 years. This will be in breakfast. It could kind of be in cakes. Well, so I start playing. And it was when I was doing that I realized that I had these little mini collections. And that's how I ended up with these mini collections called Sweethearts. So I had made brioche dough. I love brioche. And then I had made it into a babka and into a cheese swirl. And I thought, okay, that's its own little sweetheart. Chocolate chip cookies became sweetheart. It was hard to choose because the whole cookie section could have been a sweetheart. Crusts, apples. And I found, what did I find? I found a financier cake recipe the other day that just never got into the book. I developed it, I tested it, I wrote it. It probably just wasn't on one of those little cards.
Oh my gosh. So what is it? So it's the like almond financier batter with the egg whites? Or?
Actually, it was pistachio.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was a pistachio financier, but yes, with the egg whites, the nut meal, nut flour, and egg whites. Yeah. So,
Okay, so that will obviously be a column then coming up, right?
how'd you know?
You can't waste a good recipe. You have to get it out there. I mean, that's, I find myself with the same thing. Okay. What did you learn anything that from writing this book? I mean, I feel like as a recipe developer, and I know you feel this way too, we're always learning. It's like all the things that we thought we knew, we're just keep turning them on our head every time. Did you come away from this book with things where you're like, you changed the way you thought about a dessert, or it just kind of pushed your knowledge forward with something?
I think that happens. Can I put my finger on something? I mean, we can go back to, there are probably other examples and I'm going blank, but I mean, we can go back to the pâte à choux, to the choux paste, and finding another way of doing it. But so there's something, I know that I've said this so many times, but you're asking me that made me think of Julia Child, who said, so when I was actually in person at the JCC in Atlanta, I was with Kim Severson, and I said Julia Child, and Kim stopped, bent down, swept her hand across the floor and said, "Here, I think you dropped this name." So, yeah. So when I worked with Julia, at some point she had said that we were very lucky to work with food. And her reason was because we would never stop learning, that there would always be something to learn. And that's just what you just said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think you can learn throughout your life in many different subjects, but for us, we get to eat it.
We are so doubly lucky.
Exactly. Okay, I'm going to start asking. I want everybody to please, ask questions in the Q&A. I'm going to start asking some of these questions. I see we have some already, and I hope we have more that come in. If not, I have plenty more myself, but I want to give everybody else a chance to chime in.
May I just say something?
Of course. Oh, wait.
I know I don't have the chat open because I just wanted to.
Right. So I'm going to feed you the questions. Okay.
But I noticed a few names coming up, and in the audience are people, I'm going to actually, it could make me cry. There are people I haven't seen in years, but there's some original members of the Tuesdays with Dorie.
Oh.
Yeah, many. Baking group that started when Baking from My Home to Yours came out. So that's 15 years that they've been baking, and I just saw names pop up, and it's just thank you. I just want to say a little thank you.
Well, if anybody from the baking club wants to ask a question in the chat, I will, or pass on a comment. I have my chat. I mean, I'm not sorry, the Q&A. I have the Q&A open. I don't have the chat open, but I have the Q&A open, and I can pass it along. And Dorie, I'm sure you'll get to read the chat later as well. Okay, so we have a question from Claudette Einhorn, who wants you to explain your connection to Louise Penny through food.
Okay, so Louise Penny is a novelist. She just had in the past, in August and then in October, 2 New York Times #1 bestsellers.
Amazing.
Madness of Crowds, and then she wrote State of Terror with Hillary Clinton. And so I met Louise, I don't know how long ago it is now. 3 years, I'm not sure. A mutual friend of ours said that Louise was coming to Paris. I was in Paris, and that we should meet. And Louise came to our apartment in Paris. I handed her gougere. We said hello, and we just became really good friends. And she's as marvelous as you want her to be. And Louise, in her book, so she has a series of Inspector Gamache novels. There's always food. There's the bistro. There are croissants from the bakery. There are licorice pipes that people have with hot chocolate and alcohol, which, I mean, I adore licorice, but the hot chocolate part's a mystery to me. There's a lemon meringue pie that's a very important, it's a symbol of a higher power. And it appears from book 2 all the way through. And so it's really interesting to me that Louise, who claims she doesn't cook, but she loves food, that she uses food in the story. It's a time, and I asked her about it. She said it's a way to stop and draw people in and make them feel, readers feel part of that moment. And that food, she understands what we as people who feed others know, food brings us together.
Yeah, it really does. And have your desserts ever entered into any of her books? That's a question from Martha Katz.
I don't think so, though we did. So when Louise came to Paris, we had dinner at Juvenile, and that appears. So the book that's set in Paris is All the Devils Are Here, and the first meal on the first page is at Juvenile, and we had an Isfahan pastry together, and it's in the book. So there are pieces, but no, I don't think any of my recipes have appeared. I'm going to have to talk to her about that. Why?
I mean,
that?
there's still time. I mean, obviously she writes a lot of books, so maybe you should put one of her characters into one of your cookbooks.
So I haven't read State of Terror yet. It's sitting right over there. But somebody told me that Gamache appears in the book. So that would be, yeah, maybe he could come visit one of my cookbooks. I have a crush on him.
Exactly. Okay, so Sharon Sugarman wants to know if there's a recipe in your new cookbook that you find yourself making over and over again.
What an interesting question. So
I would say not world peace cookies, just because we've talked about that. So
yeah. So actually, I just made the cocoa cranberry Linzer tart for Thanksgiving. It's in the freezer. I make the gougere, of course. I make the goat cheese, black pepper, quick bread, a savory. I make I love these little marbles. So they're little buttons of meringue they can be spread with peanut butter or chocolate or speculoos cream and whipped cream. I do that because that's really fun, and it can be frozen. The chunklets, the hermits, the bread. Where is it? Oh, the grain and seed. I'm baking from my book.
So a lot of them.
A lot of them, yeah.
But I know for me, those caramel chocolates are I just love them so much.
Do you find that because you're always creating something new, that it's often hard to go back?
Yes. And my husband complains all the time that I rarely will make the same thing twice. I don't know. I feel like yes and no, but on the other hand, I like to go back and revisit stuff, because it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, aren't recipes sort of like friends? Like, oh, hello, pumpkin pie. I remember when I made you, and here I'm, and I remember like when I created you, and here I am making you again. But then there's the urge to tweak.
Right. So, but when you said early on that the recipes that you created during the pandemic daily were like keeping a journal, I feel that way about recipes that I make that like birthday cake. That's because I'm not a journaler. That making a cake, and as you said, remembering when it was made and for whom it was made or who you served it to, is like visiting an old friend and
Yeah.
like keeping a journal.
Yeah. I mean, it's because you remember when you shared it with someone. And that's another, I mean, I know that, like you were talking about food being a way to bring people in, and a way to bring people together. And it's a connection, right? And so remembering that connection is as powerful as remembering the flavors and is important. And I think that's part of what sustains us, right?
Absolutely. I also used to write and I go back and I see old cookbooks and I can see made this for Bill, or, made this for my mother-in-law's, birthday, and it's nice to go back and see that.
Yeah. I wish I wrote in cookbooks. I started to do that. I used to be like, like, oh, don't write in books, but it's better to, I think everybody write in your books, because then you have those memories. I mean, even though don't fold the pages, don't dog ear the pages,
Right.
but it's okay to write in them, or at least put Post-its. You can put Post-its with little notes if you don't want to write on the book. Okay, here's another question, which I think is a good one. Marty Michaels is complimenting you on your engagement with your social media. And do you do it all yourself, or do you have a team? And I know what the answer is.
So Marty is an original Tuesdays with Dorie. I don't think there's a recipe that I've written in a book since Baking from My Home to Yours that Marty has not made.
Amazing.
Right. So I find social media fascinating. I love when Tuesdays with Dorie started, even before, when I saw somebody make one of my recipes, I couldn't believe it. It comes from being old. It comes from being in this world and publishing books before there was this ability for us to be together like this. And so I love my readers and I love seeing what they do, and I love being able to respond to them personally.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I mean, for me, it's kind of, I'm not as active as you are, but but I take a lot of pleasure in being able to, it's like, it's a connection, right? And again, it's like the striving for connection and the wanting to know people we don't know. And I know you have too, made friends through social media.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. But I mean, even, tonight, Marty lives in Toronto. I don't know where everybody is, that we can be together like this.
Yeah.
I still think it's magic.
Yeah, it really is. It's definitely not as good as actually being in the room together, but it's much better than not connecting at all. So
That's right.
I think it is magic. Okay, let's see. We have a question from SSG who says, can you speak to any pressure you feel to create new on-trend recipes versus more traditional recipes, more traditional tastes?
It's really interesting. So I'm really pretty selfish. Again, I come back to this. I create recipes that I want for myself. It's not a question of being trendy. It's not, I get excited if I see a new ingredient and I can start playing with it. And I certainly don't want to make the same thing over and over again, but I'm not thinking about that when I'm making a recipe. I'm thinking about what would I like. And I think I think that when we choose cookbooks and we use them, we choose them because we like the author's taste. It matches our own in some way. And none of us, not Melissa, not me, not another cookbook author, is going to please everyone. But I think of it the same way I think of following a book reviewer's advice or a film critic's advice. You find people that you agree with that seem to match your taste. And so when I'm making recipes, I'm making them. Does that sound terribly selfish?
No, not at all, because that's the only way. I mean, you can't please everybody. It's impossible.
Right.
So, and how would you, and how could you? I mean, how could you? You have to start with yourself when it comes to taste, because you only have your own taste. I mean, you can listen to everybody else's, comments and maybe make something better, but you have to like it.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not, if something ends up being trendy, yay, but it's not.
But you're not trying for it.
It's not what I'm striving for.
Yeah, actually, along those lines, another question from SSG, which I think is, kind of complements that, is do you ever read the comments on your recipes on the NYT cooking app? And how do you take them into consideration? So I'm talking about, your taste versus other people's tastes.
So I mean, I look at them because I'm always worried, is there a mistake? Is something wrong, right? Did I not explain something clearly?
Right.
And so the comments are really helpful. If somebody says, I didn't know whether I'm making this up because I don't know, turn this over, or, when does the egg wash go on? And I'll go back and I'll look and think, oh, did I not explain? And they're so helpful in that way. And digitally we can make corrections if we find something that's an error. I wish it were that easy in books.
Yeah, I know that is one great thing about the app, is that, and not just when there's an error, but when, like you said, there's a better way to explain it that's clearer, and I have done the same thing. I read comments so I can get a sense of what works for people, what they're confused about. I have changed a lot of, there's a sort of standard recipe writing conventions that I don't do anymore because they're not as clear as newer, I think that's important, is to be as clear as possible, because at the end of the day, you want people to cook what you have the recipe and you want them to find it delicious, right? And so any way that you can get there.
Yeah, so I always say the only reason to write a recipe is so that the person who's making it can be successful.
Yes.
And success is physically making it without screaming at the recipe developer and being unhappy with how it gets made. And yes, and find something to, find it delicious and be happy and proud to be able to share it with someone. Yeah.
Right.
That's right. That's why that's our end goal.
Exactly. That's why we do what we do, aside from the fact that we get to eat it on the way, but okay, let's see. Candace Johnson wants to know, what is the one recipe you'd love for the Doristas to make from your new book? We love you so. We'll do what you say.
I love you more. What do you want to make? That's really a hard question. So of course I want you to make almost everything, but it's funny, the book, so I know that, the book just opened to a recipe that I love. So actually, I'll show you my book. It's brand new, and I managed to already break the binding.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. I have another copy, but now I'm so fond of this one. Oh, the apricot pistachio cake is good. So it opened to the French Riviera lemon tart, and I love. Oh, but then this one is so good, and it would be nice for the holidays. The freestyle mushroom, herb, and ricotta tart. So I love the crust, which has some almonds in it. And again, you just roll it out any which way. And then it's got a ricotta spread and some sauteed mushrooms on top of it. And I'm thinking of making it for Thanksgiving and serving it as people come in, just as, you know, a nibble.
That sounds utterly delicious. Okay, we have.
Sorry, baristas, I couldn't find just one. Sorry.
So just, okay. So one last question, because we're about to sign off, but I could talk to you forever. I mean, I really am like, is it already? But let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Has there been a favorite recipe that you created for baby Gemma, who's adorable? And she is adorable.
Gemma is adorable. I mean, let's take the next hour and talk about Gemma, who's fabulous. So Gemma's my granddaughter. She's 15 months old. And I made these little cakes for her first birthday. And they were in my Times column. So she loves strawberries. If she saw a strawberry, like her eyes got big like this and her hand went out, and she just loved them. So I made little tiny cakes in mini muffin tins with a piece of strawberry inside and a white chocolate glaze, and you know, kind of just big enough for one candle and one to grow on. And she didn't love them. It was her first taste of sugar because she hadn't been allowed to have any, and she still doesn't have much. And I think it was the texture. But I brought some chocolate chip cookies to the house, to the kids' house, and I left them on the counter. And it turns out she loves chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, well.
Loves them.
Oh, well. So it's funny though. Maybe it was like the strawberry was like a tease and it wasn't enough strawberry, but the chocolate chip cookies were a whole other thing.
I don't know. I've decided that I was a little disappointed, but I'm okay. But it's just the cookies. And as I said, she really doesn't get sweets, and she's only allowed like the teensiest tiny bit of it, but she'll walk to the counter and.
Oh yeah. She knows what's good.
She knows them.
She knows what's good.
Now. I'm really looking forward to, wait, don't go away. I found it yesterday. I forgot that I had bought it. I bought a tiny rolling pin when I was in Paris in June, and I'm saving it so that we'll be able to bake together.
Oh, that happens soon, right? I mean, probably by 3, even 2, there's there's bread, challah dough, and all that, all kinds of fun stuff.
Just a little bit. Yes, I'm looking forward to having a baking pal.
Oh, and that could be another book, actually, like a baking with kids book.
Like a baking with kids book that you wrote. Well, you didn't write a baking book.
I didn't write a baking book. I have a few baking recipes, but yeah, my book was more actually, geared toward tweens because my daughter's a tween, except now she's a teen. But when I wrote it, she was a tween. So, but for little kids, I think that's like such a great thing to share. Oh my God, Dorie, this was so wonderful. I want to thank everybody who joined us, and I want to just show the book again and tell you all that there is a link somewhere. I don't have it. Maybe we can put it in the chat of where you can buy the book that will support the JCC, which is an important part of why we're here today, to support Dorie, to support the JCC, and of course to get a chance to just be with all of you, even virtually, is still wonderful. So, okay, I think we are getting, yep, there we go, acapellabooks.com. And Pam just put it in. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this tonight. It was so good to see you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Doristas and Tuesdays with Dorie people and everybody who came. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.